Gas prices in the US have hit their highest prices in years since the start of the Iran war. On Monday, the average price per gallon hit about $4 in the US. But prices at the pump aren't the only place that US consumers are going to feel the pinch. They're also feeling it on things like medicines, plastics, and even food prices. The impacts of the war in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz could ripple through the entire economy.
If it were to be extended, it wouldn't really disrupt the U.S. economy very much at all. It would hurt consumers, and we'd have to think about, if that continued, what we would have to do about that.
The war in Iran has already raised prices for a lot of Americans. That's shaping up to be a problem for the incumbent Republicans who are looking to win a midterm that's based on affordability. A large portion of the fertilizer used in the US comes through the Strait of Hormuz, especially fertilizers that are made from urea, a nitrogen-rich fertilizer that's key to the corn crop. I had a corn grower last week tell me that he bought fertilizer in January for about $350 per ton. That same fertilizer, he said, is now being marketed at about $650 a ton. This disruption of fertilizer is coming at a key time for farmers. They're getting ready for the spring planting season, when they put their crops in the ground. That means the amount of fertilizer they're able to buy directly relates to how much they're able to plant and what they're going to be able to harvest come fall.
We're likely to see an impact on food and grocery prices potentially in the next 3 to 6 months.
A prolonged blockage of the strait could lead to raised prices for common everyday goods. Polyethylene is the most widely used plastic in the world. It's used in things like packaging, construction, and cars. 15% of the world's polyethylene comes from the Middle East, and roughly 84% of polyethylene exports from the Middle East come through the Strait of Hormuz.
So you'll see that first impact on the packaging companies themselves. They'll then pass costs along to companies that are putting their products into that packaging, and then you'll see the impact on consumers after that.
The shutdown at the Strait of Hormuz could also affect about 27% of the world's helium supply. Helium is critical for MRIs and semiconductors. Qatar produces about a third of global helium supply. In addition to the shutdown of the strait, LNG facilities in Qatar have also been attacked. Helium has no viable alternatives, and prices for helium have surged recently.
One of the downstream impacts we'll see there is on semiconductor production. Semiconductors used in consumer electronics or used in other consumer products and automotives, maybe it sort of deprioritizes part of that process. So you could see price increases in those categories.
Aluminum, which is used in things like laptops, cars, and soda cans, has been one of the hardest hit commodities of the war so far.
So aluminum is a really important kind of upstream input for a lot of different industries, and in particular certain types of manufacturing.
The US imports about 90% of its aluminum, roughly 20% of which comes from the Gulf. 3-month aluminum futures on the London Metal Exchange hit a 4-year high early into the conflict.
About 50% of generics in the United States are made in India, and they're not able to ship effectively through the Middle East, or the shipping costs will increase quite a bit. That would increase costs for the consumer.
India relies on the Strait of Hormuz for about 40% of its crude oil imports. And many of the ingredients that it uses to manufacture drugs travel through the Gulf. Many manufacturers keep about 30 to 60 days of buffer stocks. But experts warn that if the conflict drags on, you could start to see shortages or price spikes.
If the war ended tomorrow, for example, that will sort of work its way through the supply chain over the next 30 to 45 days. So in kind of a month or 2 months' time, you might see price increases in the categories that we've talked about, even if the war ends fairly swiftly.
The potential price spikes come as both parties vie to win the 2026 midterms in November. The elections have high stakes. If the war in Iran causes inflation, that certainly isn't going to help President Trump's message to voters who are worried about the economy and who are worried about costs. Democrats are betting that consumers are going to blame Republicans for this, especially if it starts hitting them in their pocketbook. Republicans, meanwhile, are mostly hopeful that this war will wrap up quickly and that American consumers aren't going to see the impacts.